All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the NHCC Legal Roundtable. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding the current state of baking in the cannabis industry. And happy Hispanic Heritage Month to everyone. This month is all about empowering Hispanics, and specifically for us, as empowering Hispanics in the cannabis industry. Hopefully helping out today with some banking questions, answering some of those. My name is Jericho Perez. I'm a board of director with NHCC. Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the NHCC. I'm getting some weird feedback. Sahar, are you hearing that? I think we're good now.
I heard you repeat the stream repeat you. So yeah.
Okay. I think we're good now. Sorry about that, everyone. But like I was saying, I'm on the board of directors at NHCC and chair the legal committee here. And part of what we do every quarter is these roundtables. Here today with Sahar Yunasazian. She's going to be discussing some of the cannabis banking questions you may have, trying to answer those. I had our national licensing group over here in Denver, working throughout the country, helping clients new to markets and additionally clients that have been in the market for a while get licensed and expand their business. Sahar's a partner in our California office. She's also the chair of our banking group. She's an expert on banking in the cannabis industry. Really excited to be chatting with her about this today. And I think we can go ahead and jump in, Sahar. So I want to start with you discussing generally the current state of banking in the cannabis industry. This has always been a struggle for cannabis operators, right? And we're making progress, but it's slow progress. So what's your take on the current state?
Thanks, Jericho. So currently, I would say that the state of cannabis banking is in one of the better places that it's been in the last decade or so. I would say that doesn't mean that it's in a good place. It just means it's better than before. So starting in about 2014, really, after the FinCEN guidance came out that provided financial institutions that wanted to provide banking services to cannabis businesses guidelines on how to do so, we started to see smaller financial institutions, largely smaller credit unions, trickle into this space. And at first, it was very hush-hush. If you were fortunate enough to find a small credit union that was willing to provide you with banking services, you didn't tell anyone about it. They would literally have you sign confidentiality agreements to not disclose who they were. More and more, as financial institutions started to see that, they're not going to lose everything as a result of banking cannabis businesses, state legal cannabis businesses, and that the Federal Reserve wasn't going to shut down their account with the Fed, that they weren't going to lose their insurance, that all of their other clients weren't going to leave them. We saw more and more financial institutions coming into this space, some that cover more than just, a neighborhood, multi-state institutions. And so right now, I would say most folks in the cannabis space, whether they're plant touching or ancillary, should be able to find a financial institution that's willing to provide them at least with depository services. Having said that, the number is still limited. You still can't go to, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank, and tell them, I am a cultivator, I'm a dispensary, I provide services to plant touching businesses. Can I have a business account? They will just tell you absolutely flat out no. If you do try to hide the nature of what you're doing and bank with those larger banks, they will find it and shut you down. So at this point, we have enough financial institutions in this space doing so publicly enough that it's easier than it has been before to find a bank account. I will say that the fees for banking cannabis still continue to be a little bit or a lot bit, depending on your financial institution, higher than for a non-cannabis entity.
Sure. So that's a good general layout. So what would you say to someone who says, where do I start? I mean, do I Do I call my local bank? What's step one? And kind of walk us through that process for how they should go about getting a bank account.
Sure. So step one is kind of an obvious one. It's figuring out what kind of MRB, marijuana related business you are, whether you're plant touching or you're an ancillary business. And if you're an ancillary business, what type of ancillary you are. If you're plant touching, it's pretty easy to figure out. You need to have a state license in order to be able to operate. So, cultivator, distributor, manufacturer, retailer, something that requires a license. If you are an ancillary business, it's important to figure out whether you are what banks call a tier 2 or a tier 3. So if you're a tier 2, you derive all or the majority of your income from plant touching entities. So you provide services, solely to operators. So you would be, for example, a management company. If you're a tier 3, you derive some of your income from cannabis, but you also provide services to other non-cannabis related businesses. Generally, it's easier and cheaper to be able to get a bank account for a tier 3 where your services and your income is diversified with both cannabis and non-cannabis. Tier 2, we're seeing it also become, much more open and easier. And then if you're a tier 1, you really need to be thinking about cannabis friendly banks that have the internal infrastructure set up to take on a cannabis client. Once you figure that out, talk to your accountants, talk to your attorneys, talk to other operators, talk to your regulators even. Chances are at this point, they will have a list of financial institutions that would work for you, and they can probably provide a warm introduction that usually tends to, speed things up and make things a little bit easier. So figure out exactly what kind of MRB you are, reach out to your network to get some suggestions for what financial institutions you should go to. And before even going to your financial institution, make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row. So your licenses, your corporate entity documentation, basic business documents that you would expect to provide any financial institution for any business, have those ready to go. You don't want to have a financial institution asking you for basic licensure information, basic business formation information, and you're not able to provide that for them. You want to be able right off the bat to provide a very solid front to them.
So is there anything unique to MRBs, cannabis businesses, that a bank may ask for? I know you just kind of ran through a list and said you need to be prepared with your state licenses, but what are things that you may not expect that you're probably going to need, or that some banks may require in order for you to bank with them?
Yeah. So one of, if not the biggest issue that a bank wants, or a financial institution, I should say, wants to consistently be able to address is ensuring that they are not bringing in funds from unlicensed businesses or illegal cannabis operations into their bank via their clientele. So, especially as a plant touching business, they will want to be able to tie back every penny that you are depositing into your account, into the bank or the credit union. They want to be able to tie that to state legal cannabis sales. So whether that's figuring out a way to API into, say, your metric or track and trace account, whether it's getting reports from the track and trace account, I would say that that's one of the more cannabis specific things, sources of information that financial institutions tend to want. And cannabis is still illegal on the federal level. Financial institutions are still taking a risk, albeit hopefully smaller and smaller every day, they're still taking a risk by taking on cannabis clients. And so they really have a pretty wide berth to be able to ask for various information. I would be very responsive to whatever information requests they have. As odd as it may sound, they're really just trying to make sure that they're essentially not a part of laundering illegally obtained funds.
Right. So for some of our newer operators out there, or those who are hoping to enter the industry soon, at what point should you start looking into banking? Should you wait until after you've begun operations? Maybe you're just using your personal account. Should you do it as a step one when you're starting business planning? We work with a lot of clients that are new to the industry. We'll take Mississippi, for example, hoping to get licensed by the state. They're not licensed yet, but they're taking a lot of investment, right, in order to start up this business and apply to the state. So what step is banking in that process?
I may be a little bit biased because banking is so near and dear to my heart. I think that setting up a consistent and transparent banking relationship should be one of the very first steps you think of when putting together a cannabis business. Even if you've submitted your application, but you don't yet have your license, approach a financial institution that is cannabis friendly. Explain to them, we've applied, we are waiting. You mentioned taking in investments. We're trying to take in investments. We would like to have a bank account first and foremost to bring investments into. Once we're licensed, we will work with you to provide all license information. And usually, especially in a state like Mississippi, for example, which is really getting off the ground with respect to its licensure program, the financial institutions there will be understanding and they will work with you. They will appreciate you approaching them from an early stage so that they can really grow your account with you. Then you going to them and saying, I have $5 million coming in about a week. How quickly can you set up my account for me? Which usually it's just not a possibility. When you're taking in investments, you want to make sure that you're putting them into the right entity. So, let's say you're doing a friends and family round and your friends and your family are all wanting to pitch in and do that initial round for you, which is how we see a lot of entrepreneurs in the cannabis space and outside of it start their funding. You want to put that money where it's supposed to go. They're not investing in you personally, they're investing in the business. It's very important that those funds go into a bank account tied to the business. I would very highly advise against, putting them into your account until you have an account for the business and then just kind of moving them over. We want to see consistency in operations, and banking relationships, solid ones, are a very important part of setting up and continuing that consistency.
Right. And, I think an interesting point is just like banks are so concerned with making sure that any money that's being deposited into their financial institution is coming from legal sources. Banking can also be an important part of getting licensed, right? It seems like regulators are very, very interested in ensuring that you're engaging in compliant banking, and then you being able to track those same concerns, the source of funds, all of those things through your compliant banking, right?
That's right. So one of the issues that was really problematic when we started to see the emergence of cannabis banking, a little bit less so now, was legacy cash, which is money that had just been sitting there, whether in cash form or in an incorrect bank account from operations due to the fact that an operator couldn't get a bank account previously. Entering that money into the banking system can be very difficult because at the end of the day, it's not exactly easy and reliable to be able to figure out what the source of those funds were. You don't want to turn your investments into legacy cash. That's why it's important to take the investment, put it into the correct bank account. As far as regulators go, especially now that we're seeing more of an opening of cannabis banking, it doesn't look good when you tell a regulator, I just can't find a bank that will take my money. I just cannot find a bank that's willing to bank me. For certain applications, as you know, Jericho, you have to be able to show a source of funds,
Right.
or a certain amount of funds. You want to be able to show that those funds are in a bank account that's tied to the business. That's, in my experience, always the best thing to do. And then as your business continues to grow, you'll want to, take in more investments, and sometimes they'll come from institutional capital, and institutional money is going to always want to see solid banking relationships. They want to know that the money that they're going to be providing is going directly into an account that's tied solely with the business into which they're investing. If you bring on an institutional investor and they do their due diligence and they absolutely fall in love with your business, and then you tell them you're going to need to wire the money to, X, Y, and Z account, but we use that account for the business, even though it's not in the business's name, 99.9% of the time, that institutional capital is just going to kind of, walk away. So with respect to not just your internal compliance, but your growth, continuing to be able to take in investments, and not getting onto the radar of your regulators in a bad way, banking is, I think, extremely important to all of those aspects.
Absolutely. So sometimes we get questions from newer operators asking, I didn't tell my bank that I was a marijuana business. I've been banking with them. What's going to happen when they find out?
So that's a difficult one. I sympathize with that because, especially in the early days of the current state of the cannabis business, the last decade or so, it was not easy to get a bank account, and operators had to do whatever they could in order to literally not have tons of cash sitting on site, and creating safety concerns for themselves and for their neighbors and whatnot. And so whatever had to be done was done in order to secure those relationships. Nowadays, again, there's really no need to lie to a financial institution. If you have been less than transparent with your current financial institution, the reality is banks and credit unions are getting more and more savvy as time goes on, and they're more and more quickly able to suss out a cannabis business that's their client that hasn't disclosed the true nature of its business to them. So whether it's in a month, 6 months, sometimes even a year, chances are your bank will shut down your account. They will give you, X number of days, usually a short period of time by which your account will be gone. They'll give you your money, usually in the form of a check, and tell you, go deposit this elsewhere. You weren't honest with us, or go deposit this elsewhere. We don't have the internal infrastructure even to be able to take on cannabis related clients. We don't have the due diligence program to do that. So realistically, be ready for an account closure. If you have not been fully transparent with your financial institution, and hidden the nature of your business, your best bet is to establish a relationship with a cannabis friendly institution. Be wholly transparent. Tell them, I am a cultivator, I am a dispensary, I'm some kind of operator, I'm an ancillary business. Here is all of my licenses. Here is, the tracking of my funds. Establish that relationship. move the funds into that new account and, close out that old account.
Got it. That's helpful. You mentioned that obviously cannabis is still illegal on the federal level. What's happening with banking on the federal level to hopefully improve the current situation for cannabis businesses?
Yeah. So, although cannabis remains illegal at the federal level, and all we really have to address cannabis banking is, an 8, almost 9-year-old document that's just a few pages, and it's guidance. It's not binding law, the 2014 FinCEN guidance. We are continuing to see growing bipartisan support for cannabis banking with every new session of Congress. And that's largely because a lack of access to depository services for cannabis businesses creates, first and foremost, a formidable public safety threat. You don't want to have a bunch of cash sitting somewhere, because that, as has been proven over time, invites violent break-ins. And the federal government now, more than ever, fully understands this. They also understand that cannabis businesses are foundational portions of their local and state economies, and that they are highly respectable, nuanced, and sophisticated businesses that should have access to banking. So support for that is really continuing to grow. We have seen the Safe Banking Act be introduced multiple sessions now. We saw it pass the House at one point. It has yet to fully pass and become law. So its current state is highly supported by most, irrespective of their party affiliation, but yet to really be cemented into legislation like we'd like to see.
So what kind of timeline do you think we're looking at? If you had to guess, I'm sure you love that question, on improvements on the federal level, seeing actual helpful legislation passed for cannabis businesses and banking.
I wish I had, a crystal ball that would just predict things for me like that in the future. I don't know that we're going to see it this year. I am cautiously optimistic about next year. And I think we also need to take into consideration where federal rescheduling, descheduling, legalization lies. Because if that gets, fast tracked more so than we expected to, I don't think we're going to see as much of a need for the Safe Banking Act. Timeline is, it would be great if it could happen sometime in 2023. Would I absolutely bet the farm on it? No. I think that at this point, we are going to be in a terrible cannabis banking position without the passing of that legislation. No, it would be nice to have it, but at this point, the industry has done so much for itself and advocated so well for itself that we have more and more financial institutions coming in. I don't think we're going to see, the large banks coming in, large financial institution related funding coming in, or, credit card transactions, for example, coming in until that passage. So it is necessary to take things to the next level, but we're doing well enough without it. But, next year would be nice. Don't know that it's going to happen.
That makes sense. So question for you. Let's say you are an investor in a cannabis business, and you bank with one of the big financial institutions, Charles Schwab, for example. What things should you be watching out for Are there any steps you need to take to make sure your banking relationship stays safe?
Large financial institutions that tend to be tied to more sophisticated investors are still very wary of taking on any cannabis related funds. So if, Joe's Pot Shop is going to be writing you distributions for your investment or is going to be repaying a loan that you've provided directly into that Charles Schwab account, I would suggest you set up an account with a cannabis friendly institution and take your returns, take your repayments and whatnot into that institution. Just because you don't want to set up unnecessary alarms for your previously well-established bank that does not want to touch cannabis funds. The reality is, usually with larger investments, especially, you will have an investment vehicle or something like that that then receives funds either from a parent company of the cannabis business that you're investing in, or something usually other than the specific licensee itself. But, do right by your financial institution and don't bring funds as an investor, don't bring funds into the financial institution that the financial institution does not want to have in there or is just not equipped to be able to process in there.
Right. No, that's good advice. Talking about banking, we've discussed how there was this issue where, especially in the past, early in the last decade, companies were collecting all of this cash because they could only take cash payments, right? That was sort of the first step issue. What are you seeing as far as cash alternative payment methods at this point?
Okay. So when we talk about the cash issue, it's first and foremost, I think, important to divide even plant touching operators into business to business relationships and then business to consumer relationships. Right. On the business to business relationships, where we're talking about transactions and payments between operators. So a manufacturer purchasing flower from an operator, to turn it into distillate and whatnot. A retailer purchasing products from a distributor, cultivator, manufacturer. Now that we're seeing a growth in depository institutions that are willing to take on cannabis clients, the cash issue there is less dire than it used to be because those businesses are able to pay each other via checks or ACH or wire and whatnot. On the business to consumer side, however, we're not seeing as much of an easing of the issue because think about how most consumers tend to pay for products nowadays. We're not really seeing consumers carrying as much cash. They want to be able to pay with card, and it's very rare to see a consumer go to buy anything, cannabis or not cannabis related, and bring out their checkbook and write you a check for, groceries, goods, cannabis, whatever it is you're purchasing. So because of consumer preferences and payment methods, really, the B2C businesses, so the retailers really are having a little bit larger of an issue still with cash alternative methods. Now, to preface all of this, currently, Visa, MasterCard, American Express have expressed that they do not want their rails to be used for any cannabis-related transactions. That word related is very important because even if the payments are not for cannabis goods immediately, if the payments are to fund cannabis purchases, it's still something that the big operating networks do not want on their rails. Now, there are processors that have come in throughout the years and said, we have the perfect solution. We've made it completely legal for you as a retailer, as a dispensary, to be able to take credit cards, no problem, no questions. 99.999% of the time, those processors are miscoding those transactions. So they're putting in a wrong, false code for the transaction that's taking place, because there is no transaction currently for cannabis purchases or cannabis sales.
Right.
And what tends to happen is that processor will get shut down, and you as the store, but also as the owner of the store who is on the application for processing, will get blacklisted. So it'll be very difficult, if not impossible, for you to access any kind of credit card processing, irrespective of the business you're in the future. Debit cards tend to be a little bit more of a gray area. I tend to take a very conservative stance on this issue. So, I'm always weary still, even of debit card processing. Cashless ATMs had been a solution that had been, used pretty widely by retailers and distributors. And Visa reiterated via a memo in December specifying that cashless ATMs on the cannabis, with respect to cannabis businesses is still illegal. It's still miscoding. That's where that word related comes in, because cashless ATM technically is not a direct transaction for cannabis purchases. It's a part of a larger transaction for cannabis purchases. So to really boil it down, credit cards, in my opinion, still a big no. Debit cards, do a lot of due diligence before you sign on, because while these solutions may provide a temporary relief from taking cash from consumers, or making it so that a consumer has to, go down to the ATM and pull cash and whatnot, that's a temporary relief, because if you're shut down and you're blacklisted, that's going to be a much more long-term nuisance for you. Right. And also it might trigger alarms on behalf of your bank. If they're, really up to date on what's going on with cannabis banking, they are going to be very weary of seeing credit card processing and debit card transactions, and they're going to ask a lot of questions.
So is the bottom line that really, as far as credit cards go, there is no 100% compliant way for consumer to business transactions to take place right now? And then as an attorney, you very rarely ever want to give an absolute, definitive response like that. I tend to get quite a bit of blowback from others in the cannabis banking space who are not as conservative as I am. In my opinion, credit cards at the moment are pretty much an absolute no in my book for cannabis transactions. Got it. Yeah. And I'll say, being in Colorado, where we have a pretty established industry, we're still not seeing any of the dispensaries accepting credit cards. It's mostly all debit cards, if they're accepting cards at all.
As it should be.
Got it. Well, this has been really enlightening. Is there anything else as far as tips, advice that you think current operators, or those who are new to the industry should know about in regards to banking?
Don't underestimate the effort you will have to put into both establishing and maintaining banking relationships. Start early, make sure that you allocate enough time for the records that they're going to ask for the questions that they're going to come back to you with. Don't expect to provide them with, your license and business registration and corporate formation documents, and that's the end of it. Expect questions, especially when they're setting up your account. Be very transparent. Overshare rather than undershare. expect ongoing due diligence on you. As we discussed, they want to always be able to tie back the source of every penny being deposited back to either, legal investments or legal operations. And never, never, never try to hide the ball with your financial institution. They will figure it out eventually, and it will end up being more of a headache than it's worth.
Definitely. And it sounds like, depending on what sort of resources you have, it may be a good idea to bring in assistance for all of those things, whether it be a CPA, an attorney. Are we seeing the CPA firms working with cannabis groups and assisting with this?
Somewhat. I think your best bet is still an attorney in this space, just because financial institutions tend to, for some reason, really like attorneys. They're risk averse folks, so they assume working with an attorney is always going to be a safer bet. It's well worth it to pay for an hour or so of your attorney's time to have them provide you with a solid list, to have them give you warm introductions to financial institutions that they have had good experiences with and other clients of theirs have had good experiences with. That hour, maybe 2 hours of your attorney's time will save you a lot more time in having to search, explore, figure things out for yourself.
Got it. Okay, well, really appreciate it, Sahar. It's been great talking with you. For everybody that's listening in, I do believe this will be posted on the NHCC website. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great Hispanic Heritage Month, and we will talk to you all soon. Thanks, everyone.